Welcome in the ring to each and every one of you. Wherever you are joining us from tonight, you are in the right place. We have all things concerning Venezuela, at least the latest, folks. And we are very happy that each and every one of you are here with us tonight. Share the live, folks. Smash that emoji button and partner with us as well. We got a champion fighter in the ring tonight, pound for pound, folks. And I'm so happy that he's here. I think it's his first time in the ring, at least on this side. He's been in a lot of other rings and other places, fighting the good fight. And we're happy to have him here at this end. You all know the rules when you come in the ring. Share the live, smash that emoji button, folks, and partner with us as well so that we can keep on doing more of these programs. Share the live so as many persons as possible get in touch with our programs, folks. The algorithm says something is happening here when you share the live, when you smash that emoji button, folks, and it helps others to get valid, credible information as well. We are very, very, very privileged to have him, and we're going to bring him on as soon as we can, folks. So hurry up and share this broadcast, share it on Facebook, share it back to WhatsApp, all of those places. Share it back to your groups, share it back to your WhatsApp groups, share it back to your groups on Facebook. Share back to your profile, folks, and let's get a go. We're so happy to see many of you already joining us. Andrew Griffith, I see you there. Penelope Hudson, I see you as well. Y'all share the live as yet? We have a really good guest this evening. I am eager to talk to him, folks. Share the live, as I said. Smash that emoji button, good folks. And come. Let me go down the road, good folks. Down the road we go. Welcome to each and every one of you, wherever you all are joining us from this evening. Again, it's a real privilege having all of you here with us. Share. Shondell Moses, I see you there. And John Walcott, I see you there as well. And the many other folks like Marcia Daniels, who's joining us this evening. Stacy Ansel, Kim Walker, good to see you folks. Let us know if you're hearing us loud and clear. Suzanne says the yoke is broken over Guyana. Amen to that, Suzanne. Amen to that. Bianca Pano, we see you there. And all the other beautiful souls joining us tonight in Guyana, the 592, and around the world. Good to see each and every one of you. Over 500 of you have already joined our broadcast. We're so privileged, folks. We are so privileged, and the comments by the hundreds are rolling in. Anita Atkins, we see you there. Dolly knows her duty so well. Dolly Anderson says, we're hearing you loud and clear. Shondell Moses is here as well. Debbie Collins is already here. I see Althea Lord Daniels, Yolanda McGarrell, Sally Daniels. The whole crew is here this evening, folks, and we are so happy. I'm going to give you guys another second to pick up on the shares, pick up on smashing that emoji button, folks. I want to have my guest as soon as possible. There is so much happening, folks, on the Guyana-Venezuela controversy, the referendum of December 3rd. So much happening on that front that we have to talk about tonight, and I'm just happy that you guys are here with us, and I'm happy that we have our guests here with us tonight to help us to make sense of some of what we're hearing, to give context, folks, to all these various things we're hearing. So happy and delighted to have him here with us this evening. So share the live, guys. Smash that emoji button. We got a long way to go this evening, guys. So let's get right to it. Good to have Patricia here with us, Sally here with us. I see Grace Noel is here with us as well. Over 800 of you have already joined the broadcast. 3 minutes in. You see how you all fast? You see how you all like bacchanal in this country? At home in Guyana, the 592, or else you got the blood and you're the diaspora. You see how you all stay? Grace Noel is here. Patricia, good to see you. Dawn Baines is here with us as well. Good to see all you beautiful folks on the live tonight. Mavis Davis Wells. You know, when we put out the flyer, I saw a lot of you say, yes, right, the right person. I feel so too. Edward Brooms is here with us as well. Good to see each and every one of you. Over 1,000 of you have already joined the broadcast on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and all the other places that we broadcast into. Great to see each and every one of you, even via LinkedIn. We know that some of you pick us up there, but good to have each and every one of you on the live tonight. Good to have each and every one of you, folks. And do I have a guest this evening, folks? Do I have a guest this evening? This is not no trench papo. It's not no jagabat. It's none of that. It's none of that, folks. It's the real deal. A pound for pound heavyweight fighter. I'm so privileged So privileged to have him with me this evening. And as soon as he gives me the thumbs up that he's ready, we're going to have him on. As soon as he gives us the thumbs up that he's ready, we are going to have him on. As soon as we get the thumbs up. But in the meantime, guys, share that like, smash that emoji. But, well, he's ready to go, folks. Fired up and ready to go. Folks, I am privileged, very, very privileged to have with me this evening none other than the one and only Rear Admiral, a former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force, Dr. Gary Bess. Dr. Bess, a very good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. I think it's your first time with us this evening.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much for having me on your show, and good night to all your viewers. It is my first time in the ring, hopefully not the last.
Excellent, excellent. I hope you can go to 12 rounds. That will determine whether it's your first or the last.
Exactly,
but good to have you here, sir. Welcome.
Yes.
We have a lot to discuss tonight because I know that you are very learned in this field that we're getting into. Rear Admiral Dr. Gary Bess, as I said, former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force. He's also an attorney at law. Hold on, folks. I want you all know we got proper guests. Dr. Bess has a PhD. Nobody bestowed it on him. You know, that's all well and good. He studied for this. International Relations via UE. His PhD is in International Relations via UWI. This is the University of the West Indies. He has a MSc, a Master of Science degree in Global Studies from UWI as well. A master's degree in law. Now this is where I connect with our brother here. A master's degree in law, folks, from the UK, and a bachelor's degree equivalent in nautical science from Brazil, one of our other neighbors. So this is a fella who understands the subject area, having his PhD in international relations. And might I go on just before your intervention, Dr. Bess? Rear Admiral Bess is also an alumnus of the National Defense University, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government in the US of A, Frankfurt School of Finance and Management in Germany. He has considerable experience also in maritime law, strategic studies, defense, and national security. And one other thing before I invite him formally is he is a former presidential advisor, worth his salt, folks, on the environment, and a past columnist at the Guyana Chronicle. Since he left, they fall down. And he wrote extensively on green economy matters. Rear Admiral Bess has presented several academic papers at conferences hosted by the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies, the University of Guyana, and the LIRDS. This is the think tank group, folks, and the University of Havana, the Anton de Koon University in Suriname, and also the Australian National University. Dr. Bess is a staunch advocate of national defense, national security, and good governance. You understand why Dr. Bess is needed in this hour, and he's a leading voice for safeguarding Guyana's patrimony in the current crisis with Venezuela. Dr. Bess, I hope in my own small way, I did you some justice there.
Well, you did me a lot of justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That a lot of information, but I'm privileged to be so introduced. It's a pleasure to be here. The information I have doesn't belong to me; it belongs to the people. So I want to share it as much as I can with the people. I'm not going to go anywhere with it. So I'm happy to be on your program. Thank you very much again.
Excellent. Folks, as far as possible, share the live. We want to get right into the discussion this evening. Now, there was a judgment handed down today concerning the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy, in particular, the referendum that is looming for December 3rd. But before we get there, Dr. Bess, a statement by the government of Guyana, this was October 23rd, said it viewed the national referendum in Venezuela, scheduled for December 3rd, as I said, especially at question 5, as most pernicious, as amounting to nothing less than the annexation of Guyana territory in blatant violation for the most fundamental rules of the UN Charter and the OAS Charter and general international law. How did you initially view this referendum by Venezuela? Let's start here.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, at the outset, the referendum that Venezuela purports to have on the 3rd of December purported to annex Guyana's sovereign territory, sovereign Essequibo, right, really is an affront to international law. It is an affront to international law. It is ridiculous that a country can hold a referendum in its own borders, purported to annex another country. And that's the first thing. So when you look at the referendum itself, the referendum defeats itself because it is contrary to international law. There's nothing in the referendum that is that is consistent with international law. So I believe from the word go, the referendum was also pregnant with problems. But of course, President Maduro is pushing this referendum. But there's something in the referendum, the particular one, question 5, which we'll come to, that is of serious concern to us in Guyana when we come to question 5. It talks about the current population and future population of Essequibo. That future population of Essequibo, I will say to my viewers, is really an annexed Essequibo with Venezuelans in it. And we have to read carefully into these questions as they were put to the Venezuelans by a referendum, and obviously it will be held in December 3rd. So getting back to your original question, it is an affront to international law. Only demagogues will come up with these kind of things, and that's what Maduro is. You know, he's a bellicose leader, and it doesn't accord to international law, but it is a clear and present danger to Guyana. That's the issue. It is a clear and present danger to Guyana. So today's judgment dealt with that, and I know you will move on to today's judgment as it relates to that particular referendum. So over to you.
Excellent, Dr. Best. A clear and present danger. I'm happy you said that because, as Dr. Best said, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, handed down its judgment in this whole referendum issue in what Guyana approached the court for. And we heard it was our agent before the ICJ, Mr. Carl Greenidge, who put this whole issue in the context of an existential threat. That's one of the phrases that they used before the ICJ. The ICJ today handed down its judgment. I want you to take a look at some of what the president of the ICJ, the Honorable Joan Donoghue, said in delivering this judgment. What exactly was the judgment? Take a listen to that, and then we'll have Dr. Bess's intervention on the other side. Take a listen, folks.
The court concludes from all of the aforementioned considerations that the conditions for the indication of provisional measures are met. It is therefore necessary, pending its final decision, for the court to indicate certain measures in order to protect the plausible right claimed by Guyana as identified by the court. In the current case, having considered all the circumstances, in addition to the specific measure that it has decided to take, the court deems it necessary to indicate an additional measure directed at both parties and aimed at ensuring the non-aggravation of the dispute between them. The court recalls that its orders indicating provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. I shall now read out the operative part of the order. For these reasons, the court indicates the following provisional measures. 1. Unanimously. Pending a final decision in the case, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela shall refrain from taking any action which would modify the situation that currently prevails in the territory in dispute, whereby the Cooperative Republic of Guyana administers and exercises control over that area. 2. Unanimously. Both parties shall refrain from any action which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the court or make it more difficult to resolve.
What were your initial reactions, Dr. Best? That was the decision of the International Court of Justice. Refrain from taking any action that would modify the situation currently. Refrain from any action that might aggravate or extend the dispute. Dr. Best.
Yes, the court is very clear in its judgment. The court uses different types of language, but the court is saying in essence that Venezuela should not have a referendum that purports to annex Guyana, even though the court did not use that language. Mm-hmm. It says Venezuela must refrain from dealing with having anything that affects Guyana. But in essence, that's what it means. The court also, in that particular judgment, recognizes the sovereignty of Guyana over Essequibo, even though the court used a different language, that Guyana administers this territory. As we all know, since 1899, we had a full, final, and perfect settlement of the boundaries between Venezuela and Guyana. So I'm happy with the decision of the court. That is a provisional measure we asked for, equivalent in law to like an injunction against Venezuela. So Venezuela is obliged to obey the court because it has an international legal obligation to follow the court's order. And that's the kicker in the decision, the extent to which Venezuela would recognize it has an international legal obligation to follow the decision of the court. Now, this is not the end of the matter. These are just provisional matters. The real case is before the court. Guyana went to the court and filed an action against Venezuela on the 29th of March 2018, seeking to have the issue of the validity of the award be settled finally, not the boundary. Just the validity of the award of the boundary, that is what is before the court and nothing else. So at this stage, for Guyanese listeners, the matter is not finished, but Guyana has got protection from the court in the sense that the court has said to Venezuela, you can't have a referendum that interferes with the sovereignty of Guyana, that purports to annex Guyana away from its other sovereign two counties, which is Borbis and Demerara. That, in essence, is what the court is saying.
Yeah, and you did allude there to part of it is going to be the response of Venezuela, and we're going to come to that. The court walks us through in this delivery by the President of the court, the National Court of Justice, the Honorable Joan Donoghue, Dr. Best, walks us through his thinking and how it arrived at this decision. It talks here about the court is called upon to determine definitely whether the rights of Guyana seeks to protect actually exists. It needs only to decide whether the rights claimed by Guyana on its merit. And it goes on to say here in what the court handed down that it is seeking the merits it is seeking protection for is plausible. Moreover, a link must be established between the rights whose protection is sought and the provisional measures that Guyana went before the court and requested. The court goes on in this delivery, Dr. Best, talking about that provisional measures will be exercised only if there is urgency, in the sense that there is a real and imminent threat that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights claimed before the court. Before the rights claimed before the court gives its final decision. So the court walks us through step by step. But it's interesting, some of the issues and events the International Court of Justice factored into its decision. I want you to take a listen to the President of the ICJ in her own words, talking about some of these events that led the court to determine there is urgency that it needs to act here. Take a listen, folks, to some of what, as I said, the President of the ICJ spoke about as meeting this urgency test, and then I'd love to have the response of the Rear Admiral, Dr. Best, on the other side.
Whether there is urgency in the sense that there is a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to this right before the court gives its final decision. The court recalls that the fifth question of the referendum refers explicitly to the creation of the Guyana Essequibo state, as well as an accelerated and comprehensive plan to be developed for the granting of Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards to the population of that territory, consequently incorporating the Guyana Essequibo state into the map of Venezuelan territory. The court further observes that Venezuela's Supreme Tribunal of Justice has confirmed the constitutionality of the questions to be posed in the referendum. The court notes that Venezuela stated during the oral proceedings that it will not turn its back on what the people decide in the referendum of 3 December 2023. On 24 October 2023, the President of Venezuela, Mr. Nicolas Maduro Moros, publicly stated that the referendum would give Venezuelans for the first time the means to take a collective decision as a country. Other official statements suggest that Venezuela is taking steps with a view towards acquiring control over and administering the territory in dispute. For instance, on 6 November 2023, the Minister of Defense of Venezuela, General Vladimir Padrino Lopez, made an appeal to go to combat with reference to the territory in question. Furthermore, Venezuelan military officials announced that Venezuela is taking concrete measures to build an airstrip to serve as, I quote, logistical support point for the integral development of the Essequibo, end of quote. The court considers that in light of the strong tension that currently characterizes the relations between the parties, the aforementioned circumstances present a serious risk of Venezuela acquiring and exercising control and administration of the territory in dispute in the present case. It therefore concludes that there is a risk of irreparable prejudice to the right claimed by Guyana in the present proceedings that the court has found plausible. The court further considers that Venezuela's expressed readiness to take action with regard to the territory in dispute in these proceedings at any moment following the referendum scheduled for 3 December 2023 demonstrates that there is urgency, in the sense that there is a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to Guyana's plausible right before the court gives its final decision. The court concludes from all of the aforementioned considerations that the conditions for the indication of provisional measures are met.
There you have it, Dr. Bass, the president of the ICJ, the Honorable Drone Donahue, giving the judgment of the court that there's a real risk here and the situation is urgent. There's a real risk of irreparable harm being done to Guyana. Are we taking this matter as real and as urgent as Guyanese, local leaders?
Well, I hope we're all taking it as real and urgent as Guyanese. I believe Guyanese are taking the matter very real and very urgent. I think they're looking towards the authorities to provide information. There are three things I think are important really here. It's the need to inform the population, and then motivate the population, and then thirdly, mobilize the population. Because we have to inform the nation, motivate the nation, and mobilize the nation in defense of Guyana. We're talking about defense here. I'll come back to that. But there's several things to unpack from the judgment, that portion of the judgment. The court
Question 5 came up.
The court has said Guyana has a reasonable chance, I'm using a reasonable chance in the substantive case of being successful. That's what the court is saying. In other words, the court used the word plausible. There's a plausible chance that Guyana's case before the court, which is the validity of the 1899 arbitral award, that case that is not yet heard, that is before the court, Guyana has a plausible chance of winning that case. That's what it is saying. And because there is a plausible chance of Guyana being successful in its case, therefore, Guyana's right over the territory, which is Essequibo, must be protected from harm. That harm coming from Venezuela. Mm-hmm. So the court, in a sense, has shut down Venezuela and pushed it back 2 paces. That's what the court has done. And in a sense, the court is saying that because there's a plausible right, the court has to protect Guyana from irreparable harm. That is, if Venezuela were to annex Guyana, and annexation can come by various means, then it is difficult to get back that territory. The other point we should take is that the court did not look for the facts. The facts were presented by Guyana's counsel. So the court essentially adopted the submission by Guyana to it, and has, by adopting that submission, it used those submissions to arrive at its decision. I'm happy with the detailed sequence of the court. The other thing to know that everything that is happening in these provisional, in the provisional discussion and argument relates to the substantive matter. So therefore, I believe Guyana is in a good position, in fact, a stronger position now in the case that the court has not yet heard because of these arguments. The court is saying, yes, Guyana has sovereignty over this territory. The question is, when that time comes, will the court rule in our favor or not? We all believe the court will rule in our favor. We now see the evidence unfolding, and it appears to me that Guyana has such a strong case that is why Venezuela is acting the way it is acting. So those are things we need to unpack from the judgment. A very careful judgment. The second part of the judgment calling on both parties to refrain from aggravating the situation. I take that as an order for Venezuela and not Guyana, because Guyana has never been the aggressor. But the court is judicious and very studious in this matter. Let us have an order for both parties. But Guyana has never been an aggressor. Never in the history, Guyana has been an aggressor against Venezuela.
And none of the instances pointed out by the president of the ICJ reference Guyana. It's a general in Venezuela. It's something that was said before the ICJ by Delcy Rodriguez. There's a number of issues there.
And therefore, when you look at the second order calling on both parties to refrain, you recognize that is just to make the judgment appear balanced. And as I speak to you, we must all remember that Venezuela is still occupying half of Guyana's, the island of Ankoko. We must remember that. The Ankoko Island is in the Cuni-Wenemu River. It's a border island. Half belongs to Venezuela and half belongs to Guyana. After we became independent in 1966, Venezuela went and took over the other half of Ankoko Island. So we've been occupied by Venezuela since 1966. So we must remember that, who we're dealing with. And for the past 60 years, the population has been indoctrinated that Essequibo is part of Venezuela. So that's what we're dealing with. So we have to have a comprehensive plan in Guyana to undo that, so that there's positive recognition of the entire Guyana belonging to Guyana, but also at the same time, we have positive action both nationally, regionally, and internationally to protect us against Venezuela. If it took 62 years for Venezuela to bring the population to understand that Essequibo belongs to them, it may take us in Guyana 62 years to undo that. And there are many things you can do, and many procedures that are available to Guyana to ensure that we put the nation in a situation where it doesn't feel threatened by Venezuela over the long durée. So that is important also to understand.
And we're going to come to some of that international help and support and all of those other things that we've been receiving, and some of what's happening also in the Caribbean. Very, very interesting as we continue our discussion. Folks, if you're now joining In the Ring, it's a very different kind of In the Ring this evening, because we have so much, as Dr. Gary Best says, Rear Admiral, retired Gary Best, former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force, said, so much to unpack there that we're going to be talking about this issue for the entire program this evening, because we have a lot to talk about. So there is this decision that was handed down by the International Court of Justice just today, and we've had some responses both from Shivnarine Chandrapal Drive, that is in Dubai at the moment, and also from Caracas. Let's take Shivnarine Chandrapal Drive. The President, Irfaan Ali, responded to the welcoming decision of the International Court of Justice from Dubai. This is some of what he said.
The order of the court was unanimous, with all of the sitting judges voting in favor of it. The order states, and I quote, "Pending a final decision in the case, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela shall refrain from taking any action which would modify the situation that currently prevails in the territory in dispute, whereby the Cooperative Republic of Guyana administers and exercises control over the area," end of quote. We welcome this unanimous ruling by the ICJ. As the court has made clear, Venezuela is prohibited from annexing or trespassing upon Guyanese territory, or taking any other actions, regardless of the outcome of its referendum on December 3rd, that would alter the status quo in which Guyana administers and controls the Essequibo region as an integral part of its sovereign territory under the arbitral award of the 3rd of October 1899. Today's ruling is legally binding on Venezuela. Both the UN Charter and the statute of the court to which Venezuela is a party require its strict compliance.
There you have it, the response from Irfaan Ali, the ICJ's decision in Guyana's favor, stating that this is a binding decision out of the court. As I said, Caracas as well has responded, and Caracas says here in a communique Nothing or no one will prevent Venezuela from expressing themselves freely on December 3rd on a matter that belongs to it, is internal, of an enormous transcendence, such as its territorial integrity. The communique goes on to say that Venezuela reiterates that it will firmly maintain an unwavering defense of international legality and of the Geneva Agreement as the only legal instrument that allows reaching a practical and satisfactory solution for both parties through friendly, political, and peaceful negotiations. Dr. Best? Like what?
Well, let me first say that the statement from the president is expected. That's an expected statement, and there's no way I expected anything different from the president, having heard the verdict, the decision rather. The second aspect from the Venezuelans, again, it's bellicose rhetoric, and as the Guyana lawyers, in this case, called it legal guerrilla warfare against Guyana. They call it legal guerrilla warfare. It's this bellicose rhetoric by Venezuela. But again, it is a clear and present danger that anything can happen. And we have to be prepared and be on our guard in Guyana when it comes to this issue. We don't take anything for chance, because this is an international legally binding decision, and that is the response from the Venezuelan government. Now, the decision is saying that you can have a referendum because that is a domestic issue, but you cannot have a referendum that purports to annex another country's territory. Now, Venezuela is signaling, in my view, that it intends to disobey that. So, in my view, Guyana needs to go on an intense diplomatic offensive. Intense diplomatic offensive. When we see our leaders outside of the country, we want to see them on an international diplomatic offensive in various capitals of the world, our foreign affairs, our diplomats, our envoys. We can add special envoys, create special envoys, people with experience, people with name recognition, people with character recognition to go out there and defend Guyana and speak to those countries. They have a number of countries we can talk to. We can talk to the Cubans. Well, let's forget the Cubans. We can continue to the Brazilians. Or we can go to the African Union and speak in the African Union headquarters. We talk about 54 states in the African Union. So there's a lot of pressure that will come now that Venezuela is signaling an intention to disobey the court. So let's wait and see if they'll adjust the referendum in any way. That's a test. That's a signal come Sunday. But I believe Guyana should start preparing for this diplomatic offensive that is required in the face of this initial response from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And I put Bolivarian in uplifted commas because I have a doubt, serious doubt, that Venezuela is indeed Bolivarian. Bolivar was the liberator. I put that in uplifted commas also. Purporting to annex another country's territory is not in keeping with liberating nations and liberating people. It's not emancipatory at all. It is almost imperialist. So that's my take on Venezuela as it is now under President Maduro.
Venezuela says nothing or no one will prevent the Venezuelan people from expressing themselves freely on December 3rd. Starbuck News this morning, in its editorial, waiting for the ICJ, as the header for the editorial says, it will be interesting to see what the ICJ will say, if only because this must be an entirely new kind of application in terms of its remit dealing with the legal dispute between states. There is no evidence, however, and you just said this, that no matter how the court rules, the Venezuelan government has any intention of amending, let alone abandoning the referendum. And we saw some of this, as you termed it, bellicose behavior before the ICJ, when the vice president herself of Venezuela spoke before the ICJ, Delcy Rodriguez. And, you know, some folks we spoke with in Mabru, and we're coming to an issue there shortly, said for a woman to go before the ICJ and speak in this manner, she got to get some back-ends. This is the vice president before the ICJ. I'd love to have your impression on the other side.
Venezuela has a solid institutional system that guarantees the constitutionality and legality of the actions of public authorities. The system has been triggered, and a ruling by the Supreme Court of Justice has confirmed the constitutionality of the referendum questions in Venezuela. Nothing is above the Constitution. Thirdly, the referendum is a single and indivisible process in its entirety. It represents the diverse visions and aspirations of a society. Venezuelans have the right to consult and listen to each other. No one can deny or divide this right. Finally, the state of Venezuela will not turn its back on what the people decide during the referendum. Madam President, members of the court, yesterday we all witnessed one of the worst ruses Guyana has devised in its false desire to present itself as a defenseless sheep and to portray Venezuela as an aggressor state, that is hindering its development and threatening regional stability and peace. Nothing could be further from the truth.
And in saying that, Starbuck News editorial went on to say, Dr. Bass and viewers, that this might all be bluster, of course, but the problem is if Caracas stirs up so much popular feeling, then there's nothing. It could conceivably be cornered into taking ill-advised action, if only of a limited kind, which it did not intend. Outside of the territory in question, what does Venezuela get out of all of this bluster, according to Starbuck News?
Well, it is bluster indeed. But let me say, it's important to mention that you notice the pin that the vice president was wearing, the map pin has Guyana territory on it, right? So that's offensive. I find that very offensive.
Before the ICJ.
Let me say the 1899 arbitral award is full, final, and perfect. That exists. The boundaries have been settled between the two countries. The second thing I want to say about this, in this context, as we speak right now, is that Article 10 of the Venezuelan Constitution says that about its territory, that its territory is subject to arbitration awards that have not been nullified. And the reason why Article 10 of the Venezuelan Constitution says that is that in 1811, Venezuela became independent. Around that time, they became independent. There were still many matters of territory to be sorted between Venezuela as a newly independent country and Spain, and also the rest of the world. So it, by its own constitution, it had to accept and acknowledge the 1899 arbitration award. That is my argument, and that is in Article 10 of its constitution. The second thing that is important, in the life of Venezuela, its constitution mentions 23 states, none of which is executable. That's the second important point for us to recognize in Guyana. So by its own constitution, the 1899 arbitral award, by its own constitution, is effective. The third point I would raise here is that in the Constitution of Guyana, since 1966, the only territory that we have put in our constitution is the territory we received from the British. So we've never been an aggressor. And the only way our territory, the boundaries in Guyana, can change is if we go to a national referendum. So no government can change the boundaries in Guyana. No minister can change it. No president can change it. Only the Guyanese population can change the boundaries that have been settled in 1899. No other authority can change that. So while we might hear a lot of conversation about boundaries and sea space and sea lanes, Guyanese ought to know that only we as a people in a national referendum, which is an election about the boundaries, only we can change it. So it's important as a backdrop to mention that before I come to the statement by the vice president. Again, as you mentioned, there's some political issues here that we have to look at. The opposition has already said, called on Maduro to suspend this referendum. I'm not saying that I agree or I'm in the opposition's corner because they're united in this issue. But again, I see cracks within the Venezuelan body politic. So indeed, maybe President Maduro's calculus in this issue is not working out the way he expects it to work out. So there's that possibility that there could be a fracture in Venezuela at this moment when it comes to whether this referendum should continue. And that is perhaps why you have the bellicose rhetoric, because he wants to win by any means necessary. The second thing is that he signed an agreement for elections in another 6 months based on the easing of sanctions by the United States government against him. So Chevron, which is a big oil producing company, has been allowed to explore for oil in Venezuela. So there's an ease of sanctions against Venezuela, against Chevron in Venezuela. And at the same time, there is this concerted effort by Venezuela against Guyana's territory. And one has to put that into context. Why is this concerted effort by Venezuela to have Guyanese territory? Why is that? And when we look and we unpack it carefully, we begin to recognize some of the geopolitical considerations within the region. And so Guyana has to be very careful and very careful as we move forward. We have Nicaragua supporting Venezuela. That's a different country. We have Colombia as a socialist nation who may look to Venezuela as an ally. We have Bolivia, not a socialist country, who may look to Venezuela as an ally. So Guyana has to be very careful in its diplomatic effort. And that's why I mentioned earlier, Guyana should go on a diplomatic offensive in the various capitals now that Venezuela has indicated an intention not to obey the order of the court. And that is something we have to look at very carefully. Will Venezuela disobey the court? And what would Guyana or should Guyana do about it? And I think we have to turn to the international effort to deal with such an issue from Venezuela. I will mention also, and we'll come to that, the issue of settlement incursion, in that we have the possibility of settlement incursion because that's what we have in Ankoko Island. Right now, Ankoko Island has settlements. People are living there for years. And therefore, when you take territory by settlement, it's difficult to dislodge. That is what happened in Palestine or is happening in Palestine. So again, on the front of the defensive front for Guyana, we have to be very careful that the persons who are crossing the border into Guyana are not coming here to establish settlements that we can't dislodge. And therefore, we have a difficulty in the demographics of the Guyanese population. All those we have to look at very carefully as we continue with this issue of Venezuela's threat to Guyana via annexation.
And some of that settlement and so on, I want to come to frontally in just a second. You talk about these incursions and what's happening. What will Venezuela do? And what is our likely response to that? And that is a question I think that occupies the minds of every Guyanese. If people on the coast are concerned, one can imagine those folks who are in the border communities, like we went to last week, Region 1, Mabaruma, we went to Yarakita, and other places there in Region 1 where people express a concern. The president was also in Region 1 last week, the very day we landed, and he spoke at Communiqué landing for a couple of minutes. And this is part of what he said. I want to get your reaction specifically on the other side.
There is absolutely nothing to fear. We are doing everything in accordance with international guidelines, and we are of the opinion that Venezuela will not act recklessly based on all the support and all the encouragement and guidance that the international community is giving. So I want to assure you, my dear friends, this morning, that we are here and you will continue to see us here all the time.
Yeah, this the president speaking from the UAE says again that they expect Venezuela to act a certain way. Venezuela says that nothing or no one will prevent us, from doing what we got to do. Are the fears of people in this country, are they legitimate?
Yes, the fears are legitimate because we're dealing with an adversary that has a much more powerful military. So I understand the individual fear of all Guyanese and the collective fear of Guyanese. So it would be odious for me to say that we should not be afraid, but we have to be concerned at the same time, and we have to look out. We have to begin to look out for each other. The calculus for defense between Guyana and Venezuela has always been defense diplomacy as the number one spear that we're using, followed by national efforts and then regional efforts. So at the national level is what you have your defense force and your other forces at national level. But defense diplomacy begins with our international diplomacy, and one can recognize a major gap in that diplomacy over the decades. One can recognize that because we had such a cadre of diplomats that they were in the international capitals, seeking out our allies, convincing our allies to speak. So when our international partners spoke on Guyana's behalf, it gave Venezuela cause to pause over the decades. There's no cause to pause right now. Venezuela is going ahead. It's steamrolling ahead. So whatever we did then, that was a cause to pause, we have not done recently when it comes to Venezuela. So we sort of on the back foot with that. But we can get back in the front of the game if we get our diplomacy right, we get our alliances right. With the rest of the international committee. That's what we have to get right. And I'm not sure what is the political philosophy guiding our foreign policy now. I used to know it before. So again, there's an opportunity for the government to sit down with experts and other persons to determine what is Guyana foreign policy. The foreign policy cannot be different from your constitutional expectations. Your foreign policy has to be grounded in the aspirations of the people. What are the aspirations of the Guyanese public right now? I'm in my early 60s, but the 20-year-old and 30-year-old, they think differently. And they, as you said, they're afraid right now. We need to tell them, and I would tell them now that right now, this matter is not yet settled, but we have a good decision in our favor at the moment. A good decision in our favor from the court, and that is coming from the expertise of the court, coming from the filing of the matter in 2018 in the first place. And the not only the ability, but the confidence of the then government in taking this matter before the ICJ for final settlement. And again, as I speak, we're talking about the award that is before the court. The validity of the award is before the court and not the boundary itself. So there's a lot of work for Guyana to do, but the government cannot do it by itself, Sherrod. The government cannot do it by itself. It is acting by itself. It is not recognizing that the opposition has a role in governance and in government. And I dare the government to tell anyone that the opposition does have a role in government. If they look at the constitution, the opposition is part of government and part of governance. And until such time as the government recognizes that and bring all the players into play, we will have what is being referred to as a one-sided Guyana and not a one Guyana. And a one Guyana could only be underpinned by the national motto, which is one people, one nation, and one destiny.
Dr. Best, you talk about this a cost to pause and the fact that we used to have a certain cadre and caliber of diplomat out there making the arguments for us. That doesn't seem to be the case. I welcome, and I'm certain you do as well, the commitments by the US that they're standing with us, and very definitive with the Arbitral Award of 1899, the Geneva Agreement of 1966. They're standing strong in our corner. We've had France recently, the UK, some other countries coming on board. Trinidad, Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister there, Barbados, Mia Motley, they don't seem too definitive, and some citizens have taken notice of this. This is one Trinidadian who took to social media quite recently. I'd love to get your reaction on the other side.
The pathway to war is being laid to take 2/3 of the sovereign nation, the Republic of Guyana, that people believe is full of oil and gas and minerals and riches and gems and gold. The President of Venezuela has the unmitigated goal to write out, construct, and disseminate for vote by the people of Venezuela on December 3rd, that despite international courts, despite jurisdictional agreements, despite the rule of law, despite international law, if a court rules that Guyana's land belongs to Guyana, Venezuelan people are going to be asked by President Maduro if they should ignore the court that Venezuela should assert their rights to the Essequibo Basin, which forms 2/3 of the sovereign nation of Guyana. After that vote, it will allow Maduro in an election season to make an election issue of Venezuelan superiority and colonization of the weaker Guyana, because Venezuela army is very strong. It may not have all the latest equipment, but there are jets, there are missiles, there are tanks, there's a standing army, they have guns, they have M16s, they have AR-15s, and so on. And what does Keith Rowley say? Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, a brother country, a CARICOM member, Guyana is under attack. And Keith Rowley comes out in a press conference and say, well, no big thing, this has been going on long. We have the same position as CARICOM, Venezuela, cool it now. No, we don't need really to do anything. We don't need to make a statement. Keith Rowley did not send himself and Smallpin to go to Maduro with Amory Brown behind them carrying the bag to say, listen, stop this madness. We are your friends. We're trying to do dragon gas. Do not go and get us involved in this, because we will have to support Guyana. We will not stand by and watch you take a CARICOM brothers land away from them. Stop it, Maduro. Rowley ain't saying nothing like that. Rowley have no foreign policy. Rowley not supporting Guyana.
Dr. Best, why hasn't some of our Caribbean leaders been definitive on this issue?
I can't speak for the Caribbean leaders. Honestly, why they have not been definitive, I can't speak. But I say CARICOM is speaking. I expected a stronger statement from CARICOM in the beginning. There is a statement now since the judgment that appears to be much stronger. Dr. Curtin called for an immediate summit of CARICOM leaders. In fact, he said Guyana should call for an immediate summit, and I agree with him. President Ali should call for an immediate summit of CARICOM leaders to deal with the Guyana-Venezuela issue, because it's not only a bilateral issue, it's an issue that will affect the region, because maritime boundaries will change if the borders were to change. It will affect Venezuela, it will affect Trinidad, it will affect Barbados. So a CARICOM approach is an excellent approach. We talk about 15 votes at the level of the United Nations. CARICOM can leverage those votes, leverage its power, its voting power within the United Nations, within the OAS. So collectively, we can do a lot for Guyana. The other thing too, Trinidad has been in harder times. Trinidad has been there for Guyana. Trinidad has and Forbes Burnham, the late Forbes Burnham, had a very good relationship. I don't know what he had over equivalence, but we could have gotten money to borrow off them to help us out. I believe, and I've said this before, and I say it in this program, that Guyana should treat its resources not only as a Guyanese resource, but as a CARICOM resource. I think if we send a strong message, we can have our own petro diplomacy within CARICOM. We may not be able to replace PetroCaribe because of the amount of oil Venezuela has, but we can certainly set up a fund from which CARICOM nations can benefit in terms to deal with disaster relief, to deal with short loans, emergency loans. I think that would bring CARICOM more within the frame of mind. I don't get the impression that they believe these resources are going to be there to assist them, because we did benefit from Trinidad resources under the previous Trinidad government. I would not speak to Prime Minister Rowley. He's an astute politician, but I have the confidence that those countries will not abandon Guyana. Let me also mention the RSS. Guyana is a member of the RSS, the Regional Security System. And in the regional security system, it says an attack on one is an attack on all. And that is determined members of the RSS. So there is a duty, a treaty responsibility of the RSS nations to Guyana. And I might mention that Guyana also, in 1990, I think it was, we had troops in Trinidad to assist Trinidad when there was an issue in Trinidad. So we did go to support the Trinidadian people in that particular issue. So I think when the time comes and the bell calls, if the bell calls, I expect CARICOM to be there. Let me just make this point about the Geneva Agreement. Mm-hmm. As the Venezuelan Vice President mentioned the Geneva Agreement as the only mechanism, meaning bilateral solution as the only mechanism in the Geneva Agreement. And that is the lie the Venezuelans have been telling their people. Bilateral discussion is one of the methods in the Geneva Agreement. In my view, Geneva Agreement checkmated Venezuela from the time it was written. That since 1966, Venezuela was checkmated by the Geneva Agreement. And why do I say so? The Geneva Agreement does not speak about exequiable. Neither does the Geneva Agreement speak about the border, meaning that the border, we have to look at the border within the context of the Geneva Agreement. It doesn't mention the Guyana. It talks about dealing with the controversy. And the controversy arose from a posthumous letter.
Yeah.
Remember, the border is settled. It is settled, full, final, and perfect. Malé Provost purportedly dictated a letter to a gentleman who purportedly took the dictation. There's no signature on the document, and said at the time that there was collusion, and therefore the award, the whole process was corrupted. Yeah. That is Malé Provost. Venezuela has been asked to submit that information within the context of the Geneva Agreement. But let me ask you this question. How can two countries finalize a corrupt deal? Only a court can deal with that.
Yeah.
I believe Venezuela was checkmated, and we have to give credit to the parties to the Geneva Agreement, which at the then time would have been the Venezuela, the British, and Venezuela, United Kingdom, and then British Guyana, represented by Forbes Bond at the time. So they were checkmated. They could not discuss anything with us except the controversy, which is the Malé Provost letter. And that checkmated them. And that's why Venezuela has been saying for decades that we need to solve this matter bilaterally, because they know once we go to the international front and we go to the international court, they have to provide evidence of this collusion. They don't have the evidence of this corruption, in my opinion. That's why it has not been presented. And that's why they're pressuring Guyana all the time for bilateral discussions. So they have misused the Geneva Agreement. They have misinformed on the Geneva Agreement. And as recent as this morning, we heard the Vice President talking about in accordance with the Geneva Agreement. It is the Geneva Agreement that took us to the court. The matter is in the court because of the Geneva Agreement. And because they've told that lie to the population for 60 years, they have to continue telling it. And that lie is not going to fly in the face of the International Court of Justice, because they have said that they have jurisdiction to hear this matter. So I think Venezuela is in a tight spot. Well, I'm not saying that to say that we must be relaxed, feel that the matter is over. This matter is not going to go away easily, because after 60 years in indoctrination, right, the Venezuelan who's 40 years of age, 50 years of age has that in his head. 10 years of age, he or she has that in his head. And Guyana has to go on a diplomatic offensive and a national offensive in terms of education, and ensure that every Guyanese recognize that it belongs to Guyana. The other point I want to make is our constitution also is important. Our constitution, which we call the Barnum Constitution, says in Article 33, it is the duty of every citizen to defend the state of Guyana. Every citizen. That means every citizen. It means every citizen. Sherwood, it means every citizen. Private sector, Indian, African, Portuguese, Douglas, all of us are in this together. And all of us have a duty to defend this country. Rich, poor, not so rich, not so poor. We have to understand that. It is not only the duty of the Guyanese Defense Force to defend Guyana, it is the duty of every citizen. And every citizen and every organization, every substance that is there is what is called total national defense. Total national defense is the bringing together of all the resources in the country and making them available to the institutions that have to go forward and fight. In that case, it would be the Guyanese Defense Force. It also reminds us of the other institutions that were established that were there to protect Guyana. First of all, living frontiers. The first of the villages that were titled, if I recall, were those frontier villages. And those frontier villages, our brothers and sisters, American brothers and sisters, were a first line of defense. And around them, we had the reserve.
Correct.
It's a small defense force in the last reserve. We had the national service also in remote areas, bring a sense of nationalism and a sense of readiness All of that, plus our diplomatic effort, created the opportunity for Venezuela, give Venezuela cause to pause. And that's what we need. Right now, the ICJ has perhaps given Venezuela cause to pause. Let's wait and see what will happen. But we have a national responsibility. We have a national responsibility to defend this nation. And we have to spend more of our resources on defense assets to make this nation safe and let our people feel safe. We can't depend on external. Only the first line of defense got to come from Guyana. And I think we have the resources. We have the resources to do it. We need to have the commitment, and we need to have the right people putting together the plan. And the defense plans for Guyana are there. They're already there. There are many persons who are quite experted, who wrote it. Some of them still alive. President Granger, for example, knows very well about the defense plan for Guyana. He's still alive. We have other persons who know about these plans. And we have exercised it and practiced it as members of the Guyana Defense Force. So we know about it. And the government, again, I make the point, this issue requires all of us to be involved, and not only some of us to be involved. And there are experts out there. So I just wanted to clarify this Geneva agreement.
Excellent.
Venezuela is talking about as if it was a mistake. It checkmated Venezuela. It is a Geneva agreement that caused them to be in court. It is a Geneva agreement that caused them not to discuss SQ, but not to discuss the boundary. So it is not something that created a problem. It is something that has brought us to this stage. We're at this particular stage, we're looking as having the best case at the ICJ. And of course, today we had provisional measures because of the Geneva agreement that was put in place. And people must remember also that Forbes Bonner was not prime minister at the time, he was premier at the time, because Guyana was still a colony when he signed on behalf of British Guyana. It was not, but when we became independent, we became more robust. So I think that is important for persons, people to know. The other thing that is important also is Article 2.1 of the Constitution. I think it's 2.1 of our Constitution makes the point that Guyana is an indivisible state. Our land can be transferred, it's indivisible, cannot be divided. You cannot subtract from our territory, but you can add to our territory. You check the Constitution, you see that. And I hope that our leaders will lead with more cognizance of the constitutional provisions that exist. We'll make less mistakes.
Point taken.
Less mistakes we'll make if we lead and govern with the Constitution in mind. And that's why we bring to the nations and the people's knowledge that the Constitution says that only a referendum can change our borders and change our boundaries. And the people ought to know that. And that's why we're bringing that to them, to their attention. They can feel safe that only, we're not losing territory. We're not going to lose territory just like that. This is a very, very serious issue.
Point taken, Dr. Best. And finally, as we wrap up, you talked about the influx of Venezuelan or porous borders. We talked about invasion by other means. The Vice President, Barjagjo, dealt with this issue a short time ago, and about 2 weeks ago, in one of his press conferences. He seemed to have dealt with it very lightly. The question is, are we doing all that we can on this other front? Take a listen to what he said. I'd love to have your response on the other side.
Now the new boogeyman, rather, is the group of people who are here now, the Venezuelans, who are here, that somehow they're being registered across the country in large numbers and by the People's Progressive Party, and they will determine the outcome of the next elections. We don't see any evidence of this here in the actual registrations that are taking place in the country. It's false. They're really Guyanese. Their parents migrated. They had to flee Guyana to Venezuela, to the islands, to Suriname, to the US. They fled this country in droves. And a lot of those people had children who were born in Venezuela, but by virtue of the Guyanese blood, they're eligible to have Guyanese citizenship, notwithstanding the fact that they are born in Venezuela. So this is a big issue now, the Venezuelans here. Now, clearly, the concern about people who come here and have no connection with Guyana, that there is a need at some point in time to repatriate them.
Some point in time, Dr. Best, are we doing all that we should be doing on this other front here? Are we doing all that we should?
Well, a couple of points. I had written an article on this matter, and I suggested to the government that we have an immediate amnesty in Guyana. An immediate amnesty, maybe a 18-month amnesty or 2-year amnesty, to determine exactly the Venezuelan migrants who have connections to Guyanese, and I don't doubt that we have, those Venezuelan migrants who can be considered refugees, and therefore they're treated as refugees, which doesn't include national identification and all those things at the immediate stage, and those Venezuelans who will be economic migrants. I think unless we have the data, there'll be these suspicions. What the good gentleman has not said is about the data. The data is not available. I also said that the government and the opposition should be involved in this because there's suspicions. Persons are elected to govern in the interest of the people. The final say comes from the people, not from the government. It is the people who elect the government. A journalist has every right to ask any question of any official that he or she elected. And the same thing happens when it comes to this issue of the border. We have a right to know how many Venezuelans are in Guyana. So we don't have the numbers. There's no transparency in it. Therefore, there are suspicions. So I would say that I do not believe we're doing sufficient because the information is not available to deal with the suspicions surrounding Venezuelans in Guyana receiving documentation. So we don't know how many Venezuelans are in Guyana. And to the point of settlement incursion, I make the point that I heard the good gentleman said at some point in time. I said immediately have an amnesty. And as I think the AFC said, let us suspend any Venezuelan national from going in the register until we can sort this matter out. Let us sort it out properly. Let us ensure that the Venezuelans who are connected, because those Venezuelans who are connected to Guyanese, at some point in time in the registration in Venezuela, you have to see something that says Duncan or Bess, Singh, Prasad, and all those names will appear somewhere. If it don't appear, it's okay. How did we get the name changed?
Yeah,
I think it's important. Nobody wants to put Venezuelans out because we are a migrant population too. But the fact that it is not being done in a transparent manner, it is not being done openly, and the fact the opposition is not being made available of the information that it has a right to see. And I think the issue, because you're elected and you're the government, no one else would be involved in government and governance. That's a big mistake being made by the current government. I don't want to be too political because I'll come back at some point in time and we have politics here, but this is a political matter. And it's a matter that is quite distressing to many constituencies in Guyana. So I trust the government will heed and have a referendum, amnesty, and bring this matter to a proper closure. That's my view on this.
Excellent. Dr. Best, I wanted to thank you for spending this entire hour with us and helping us to make sense and wade through and unpack some of these issues that we heard today and that have been ongoing. Thank you so much, Dr. Best, for your time with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully not your last.
If I made it through the hour, then we'll know what happens next, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, yes.
Folks, that was, again, Rear Admiral retired Gary Best, Dr. Gary Best, former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force. And that is the information we have for you at this hour, folks. As we wrap up, as we go, take another look at that decision handed down by the International Court of Justice just today, folks, by the Honorable Joan Donoghue, the President of the ICJ, in Guyana's favor, as we wrap up today.
The court concludes from all of the aforementioned considerations that the conditions for the indication of provisional measures are met. It is therefore necessary, pending its final decision, for the court to indicate certain measures in order to protect the plausible rights claimed by Guyana as identified by the court. In the current case, having considered all the circumstances, in addition to the specific measure that it has decided to take, the court deems it necessary to indicate an additional measure directed at both parties and aimed at ensuring the non-aggravation of the dispute between them. The court recalls that its orders indicating provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. I shall now read out the operative part of the order. For these reasons, the court indicates the following provisional measures. 1. Unanimously. Pending a final decision in the case, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela shall refrain from taking any action which would modify the situation that currently prevails in the territory in dispute, whereby the Cooperative Republic of Guyana administers and exercises control over that area. 2. Unanimously, both parties shall refrain from any action which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the court or make it more difficult to resolve.
Yeah, that's it, folks. Have a great weekend. Stay alert, folks. Stay alert. Have a good weekend and continue to pray for this nation. Good to see so many of you on the live tonight. Minerva Monroe Reese, good to see you. Delight One, good to see you as well. Quasi, Malcolm, good to see you. McLennan, good to see you. Good to see you. Alison Cortez, have a good weekend, folks. Veronica Premo Rollins, good to see you as well. And Iban and all the other folks. Iban Lamy, Wenda, good to see you. Andrew Griffith, good to see you. And Anne-Marie Selby, have a great weekend, guys. That's going to do it for us at this end. That's our time, good folks. And that's our program. Stay safe. Stay safe.